By the Waters of Babylon, actually a selection by you, Mr. Crypto.
This one has a special place in my heart.
So you said, I think you told me that, hey, this is something that you remembered from your childhood. Like, first of all, childhood, I guess, was it high school?
High school.
Yeah, so like 50 years ago for you, right?
50 years ago, yes. So in high school in 1950, no. But yes, back in the 90s, I went to a small high school. Long story short, everybody going to class, and we all grabbed our literature books. Back then, they had these big, huge literature books that all had different colors. Each one was for a different grade level. So we're a freshman. We go all in. We sit down. Hey, what's the reading today? Teacher gives us the reading, and we read this story. And I was so entranced with this story because I consider myself pretty good reader, pretty intelligent, picking up on things, and I had no clue about the twist. It caught me completely off guard. And now that I've read it, as an adult, I was like, man, I was pretty dumb. Like, it's very apparent of some of the clues to see the twist early coming on. A lot of foreshadowing. And I asked the teacher, I said, because we were supposed to leave the literature books in the classroom. I asked her if I could take the book home because I wanted to read it again because the story was so good. I wanted to see what did I miss of why I didn't pick up on what the twist was going to be, the big reveal at the end of the story, towards the end of the story. And so I read it again. And then, all these years later, when we were talking, I was like, man, this story is like so good. And then we read it. You pointed out to me like, hey, did you realize there's so many like religious stuff and the Waters of Babylon? Like I should have, but again, went completely over my head because that twist just stuck in my mind. And now that I look back on it and we read it again, there's so much religious symbolism here that we can get into.
All right, good, because I get to make fun of myself too, because I started to do some analysis and I'm like, oh, wait, that's completely wrong. And I'll explain perhaps some of my incorrect thinking here as we go through this. But in terms of plot, because we always do a quick recap, I think it's kind of interesting having this first person narrator, John, who lives in this post-apocalyptic world, right? We're the river people. We hate the forest people. We hunt with bows and arrows. We live in this tribe, which it gives off this like tribal organization to the world, like lacking government, if you will. And it's very, I don't know, like by modern terms, Moana, like it's dangerous out there. Don't leave. Like, like you can't go east. You can't go across the water. You can't do this. Like how I imagine also as a young kid, this might have related to you on the you can't do X because you have like so many limitations and structures put on you as a kid that you're not free to define yourself yet. And that can be very frustrating, I think, for a lot of young readers.
And this is a great coming of age story where John is the son of a priest. So he's a priest, in training, and he basically goes on his pilgrimage to find himself. It's kind of hinted at in the story that the priests know more than they're letting on. They have the knowledge, the forbidden fruit, so to speak. So John goes on this pilgrimage into the forbidden zone and learns a lot about himself, learns a lot about the world he lives in, and then comes home and kind of not so much has an epiphany, but he has a heart-to-heart with his father of, hey, I found this out, and I think that we need to start teaching the people more about our world that we live in and maybe recapture some of what we've lost from our past.
And even challenge our assumptions of the world too, which I think, when I mentioned to you that I had this religious view, like this faith interpretation as well as this war and technology interpretation, I think interestingly enough, there's some commonality between the two of those interpretations as well. And I was listening to the audiobook like a second time this morning, just trying to refresh myself because it's been 2 weeks since, we first talked about it and I read it. And I wrote down this one quote as I was listening to it, and I was just like, wow, that really summarizes what I think is kind of an interesting thrust between both of these interpretations. And that quote was said by John, and he says, "My hunger for knowledge burned in me." Right? And I think that just really rings true because, like, what do we know about their society? They're prohibited from a lot of different things, right? You can't go east. You can't go across the river. You can't go see the river people, right? Like, these people are prohibited from what? Not just traveling, but even knowledge in terms of like the ability to read and interpret. And I think that's interesting that the topic of what do we do with this forbidden, I think you called it fruit, right? This knowledge, and is quickly receiving knowledge potentially dangerous? I think a topic to be discussed here.
For sure. And there's a lot of movies that have kind of done this as well, of giving advanced technology to primitive societies can vastly alter them, usually in a negative way, not positive. I mean, even like in Star Trek, right? The prime directive is no interaction with these, primitive species, because it can vastly deter their society. And John is very curious about the what he finally figures out as technology. So going full spoilers here, in the beginning of the story, you're thinking, is this story set like in the year 1200 or something? What's going on here? Again, I missed this as a young reader. There are many clues in the story where it talks about Ashington, and it talks about the Herbitaria, and this is Washington Monument. It is the Treasury Department, and you realize that they're in post-apocalyptic America. There's been a nuclear war, and these people are living in like radiation-free pockets. And when he goes on this journey, he sees all the magic of the forbidden ones, which is our technology, that he'd understand the hot and cold or the escalators. All these things confuse him, but he's finally realizing that, these are our people. This was our technology at one time, and we need to reclaim this. But to your point, we have to do this slowly, because if not, we could end up right where we were.
Okay, you've walked me exactly into the interpretation that I want to talk about, because I had the same thoughts as you, and now I'm questioning myself. Is that it's never wrong to read it in a pure formalism perspective, right? We can talk about the eternally burning ground being the radiation sickness, the falling from the sky being the ashes from the mushroom cloud of a nuclear fallout. But I also think, like we've talked about before, sure, you can do the formalism approach and there's nothing wrong with it. But I think there's also like times to like take in the author's view, right? And this was written in 1937, right? And we hadn't even discovered nuclear fission until 1938. And the bomb, the first atomic bomb, was it 45, right? So this is all well before the idea of nuclear war, meaning like eternally burning grounds and falling from the skies. Like what were the common weapons then? It would have been the fire bombings, right? And highly explosive weapons. And I think that's even more terrifying to think about, because this story predates the exact same thing it warned about. You gain knowledge too fast, and you use that before fully understanding the ramifications. Think about that nuclear bomb. We did not fully understand what the radiation was going to do to a populated area until after it happened, right? The thousands upon thousands of deaths at the time of the bombing is almost, I can't say inconsequential, but the idea that we thought that was going to be the big exclamation point, but then there's the years of death and radiation in the land that you start to realize there's a lot of unintended consequences from this knowledge that I learned too quick. And so, yes, this story technically predates the discovery of nuclear fission, right? However, it perfectly predicted that problem of getting information too fast. You called John, what did you call him? You called him intelligent, I think. I think you called him courageous. And I think that courage also has to come with wisdom, because just having the courage to use knowledge, like a weapon of mass destruction, too quickly can lead to what is ultimately, I think, a mistake at times, right? Like we can see how quickly we can destroy each other. And I think most of us agree killing is bad. So what do we do in this situation? It makes it a little bit more difficult of what do you do with this advanced knowledge?
And this is where I took it this time around, kind of looking at it more from a religious perspective, historically knowing, to your point, that we hadn't discovered atomic or nuclear weapons yet. What could this be interpreted as? Knowing now what I know, this leads very well into hell. The the places you're not supposed to go.
Yeah.
We're being punished, our sin for our hubris of taking that forbidden knowledge or not having the wisdom to use it properly. So I think that there's a lot of religious symbolism here. I mean, the waters of Babylon, the Tower of Babel. His name is John. He's a son of a priest. There is so much here, and probably the most famous quote I think that's used most often when analyzing this story is when John finally discovers what is truly going on in his world that his father, I think, knew the whole time. I think all the priests know. They're the ones that covet the knowledge because they don't want another apocalypse. Is the gods are men. I saw them and knew they were men. And now he has that knowledge, but he also has wisdom, but he doesn't have wisdom of age like his father does, but he has the wisdom of youth. And I think that he wants to use this in a positive manner to get humanity back to where they were.
That's such a good point. I hadn't thought about that idea of like, the hell and the sins. In Tower of Babel, totally right. Like man's hubris grew too fast, scattered them, made them speak different languages. Very famous story. But also don't forget about how the Babylonians, right, destroyed, what is it? I forget the name. I'm just going to call it the first temple in Jerusalem, right? And you had the exile, basically. Like if you read Psalm, I wrote it down here, 137, by the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down. Yeah, we wept when we remembered Zion. And that makes me think of the story, the way that these people, that reverence of that past, the fear, almost like you talked about how the priests have the knowledge and they don't share it freely because some people can misuse that knowledge. Because sometimes this is like that concept of knowledge is power, even. And I just think if we talk about it just from like a pure literary perspective, like just like a pure mechanical perspective, what does he have to cross to get to the place of the gods? He's got to go through the river. And what is going through the river? That's the baptism to be born again, to gain new knowledge, a new perspective of eternal life. It's all there of him going on this journey almost as like would you say prophet? Like almost like a person to receive the wisdom, the knowledge, and then go back and help fellow mankind. Like that's why I say prophet, I guess.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, John is going on a spiritual journey of enlightenment, not only for himself, but for his people, because he wants things to be better. He wants things to improve, I think, for his people beyond just his own curiosity. And I think that this puts it in as that humanity has the capability for greatness, but without wisdom, the possibility for destruction and doom. That's I think that's the lesson possibly John's father is wanting him to learn by allowing him to go on, this this growth through this journey to the forbidden zone. So amazing story. Just crazy. There's so much compacted into this story. And again, reading this as a freshman in high school, I missed so much of it because there's so much here that you can take it different ways depending on your interpretation and when you read it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think, to your point about reading it, when you're younger and you have all these structures put on you by your school about what you can or can't do, if you're in a church, what you can or can't say there, sports, what you're allowed or not allowed to do, what's good sportsmanship in sports. You have all these rules put onto you. And this is one of those stories that I think kind of lets you live from a first person perspective, kind of see that forbidden knowledge and then realizing why it's there, realizing why limitations are put upon you. And kind of coming to grips with like, yes, things have to come to me with time, with responsibility. And I think knowledge isn't something to be used as a weapon to withhold, but as to be given out responsibly, if that makes sense.
Oh, totally agree. That way, for John, humanity can rise again. I think he's yearning for a better life for him and his family. And
okay.
I think that's what we all want, right?
Well, and totally kind of like off topic, for people that don't know out there, I was just in a conference, and lately here, the year is 2025 right now, and nobody in a conference is allowed to give a presentation unless they talk about AI when it comes to the tech world. Like it's just exploding, right? And one of the things they talk about is guardrails. like this where you host stuff. There's literally this tool called AWS Guardrails, and it puts limitations on the responses that you can give. So like, let's say you wanted to limit sharing who was the contract for who built this building. You could say guardrails, trying to prevent giving out this type of information. And the same thing about atomic bombs, right? If you're going to put A out there, you should probably have some guardrails that keep you from saying, how do I make an atomic bomb? Like, not saying like you just go to Walmart and buy these supplies, but like there's that idea of what do you do with information responsibly? And we can see how that's now even playing out in a very modern way in society today.
It reminds me of the movie Idiocracy. Go down to the superstore and buy whatever you want, a time machine.
Yeah. All right, guys, let us know what you thought about this story. What were some of your favorite takes from it? And what did you think about the usage of knowledge and whether that's a weapon or whether that is something to be shared with responsibility? My name's been Una. Thank you for spending time with us today. Peace.
Peace.